1986 or 7. They came in 87. And there were petitions put all around town saying, if you want your taxes not to go up, sign here, because I was trying to float that Pan Am bond issue, as it was called, which included a lot of neighborhood revitalization projects. And it failed. And so we could not do what I originally planned, which was to have Lockfield Gardens become the place where the entire group of athletes would be housed and so forth. Because we were pushing to become known as a center for athletics. And the backup plan was to use Fort Harrison, which is what we did. But you got to have a backup plan. That's another lesson learned. Finally, the third lesson was that the C words are more important than the I words. That things like collegiality and consensus and coalition and cooperation and compassion are better than individual and I and igloo and island and all the rest of it. In other words, come let us reason together, as the good book says. That has to do with civility, but it also has to do with putting your arms around the city and thinking of it as, in a sense, your parish, and you try to bring everybody together and serve people. We had a program on 2 or 3 radio stations every month for 16 years while I was married. Opportunities for service, to try to help people solve some of their little problems. In the church, we dealt with the ultimate problems of human existence, like life and death and marriage and baptism and all the rest of it. And in public life, you deal with the penultimate problems of human existence, like picking up your trash, plowing the snow, filling the chuck holes, and all that sort of business. But the key to Indianapolis, I think, is partnership. And the feeling that we've all got to work together for the common good. And that's really what the spirit or the soul of Indianapolis, in my opinion, is all about. When I was trying to keep the Pacers here and keep them from going to Sacramento, finally I landed on Herb Simon's doorstep. And Herb and Mel Simon, as you all know, bought the Pacers. And at the end of the conversation, it was Herb, myself, I think Jim Morris. Herb looked at me and he said, yeah, I guess I've got to do it, don't I? I said, yeah, Herb. He said, for civic pride. And I said, that's right. There's a certain pride here in this community. And one of the lessons I learned is that caring about people and bringing them together is a way of showing philanthropy through public service and overcoming the tremendous gulf between the minority community and the police department, and on and on and on. I could go on, but my time is up, and John's got to get up here. Let me just conclude by saying, if we're talking about a journey inspired by faith, I think that at the end of the day, as I look back after almost 8 decades of living on this terrestrial sphere, I have a sense that things happen for a reason, and that somehow, in His providence, God makes sense of it all and makes it come together. Sure, I've had lots of disappointments. I've made lots of mistakes. It's no fun to lose an election. You think the end of the world has come. It's no fun not to be able to get a job, but you think that maybe you'll get one somewhere else. Well, it's all worked out. In other words, God's providence somehow spans our life like a rainbow. And our job is to walk under it and be conscious of it. Or the way Shakespeare put it, there's a divinity that shapes our ends. Rough hew them how we will. And at the end of the day, it seems to me that this is retrospective wisdom, of course, but at the end of the day, it seems as though I've been blessed in the sense that things have worked out pretty well for me. And I thank you for your attention, and now we'll turn to John Cross. I might just say as he comes up here that John has been a dear friend since we both left office, as well as when we were there. I hope this is working. And You heard from Bill Enright what he does now, but he was a tremendous help to me. And I don't think we've ever gotten a lot done in the field of economic development that happened without this man right here. So John, it's a pleasure to be with you again.
I'm just supposed to be your prompt, but I think there's 3 stops on the train of thought that I'd like us to go. One, if you could expand a little bit more about the difference between the call of the ministry and the call of public service. And what's the challenge in making that transition? And what are the risks and rewards of each of them? And the second stop I want to talk about is, and you alluded to a little bit of it, does the city have a soul? Does it have a spirit? Because I have described you as a minister and you think of the city as your congregation. But how do you minister that? And then the third thing is probably looking a little bit forward. How do you practice your faith, live your public and private life, in what is today a rather electronic version of a petri dish? So let's go back to the first stop. The call of ministry and the call of public service.
Well, I think there's a lot of similarities. Because in both you're working with people, you care about people, and you're trying to bring people together, and you're trying to help them with their needs, and that may mean taking up the cause of civil rights, as my good friend at the time, Murray Saltzman did, the rabbi at the temple up there on Meridian Street. You know, this is something that transcends a particular approach to religion. Obviously, there are certain things that you have to deal with when you're a minister that you don't have to deal with when you're in public life. And incidentally, I believe very strongly that it was wrong for me to espouse my religious feelings when I was somewhere in a political setting. And I also believe it's very wrong to preach politics from the pulpit, capital P, you know? And not everybody agreed with me. There's a minister here in town named Moselle Sanders, who was a good friend. But the morning I was invited to go there to preach was the morning in which he came out in the paper opposing me for re-election. Or no, for election to Congress. He said, I don't like any of you Republicans. Well, 4 years later, I went back on the same Sunday right before the election. This time he stood up in the pulpit and said, I support Bill Hudnut for re-election because he's done a good job. You know, but I tried to stay away from that. And people would criticize me. They say, well, why didn't, if I was pressed into service in public life, why didn't you end up that prayer with Jesus, through Jesus Christ our Lord? I said, because not everybody here is comfortable with that kind of expression. So I try to avoid mixing the two, John. In public life, it's a question of trying to serve people. As I said, Alexander Hamilton said, here, sir, the people govern. And it's government of the people and by the people and for the people. And that's what counts. More so, I think, than any of the issues that we face. More so, probably, than any of the divisions between Republicans and Democrats and ideologies on the right or the left or in the center. It has to do with giving of yourself to others, and that's what philanthropy is all about. So quite similar in some ways.
Does the city have a soul? Does it have a spirit?
I think a city does have a soul. I think that here, the civic pride that I mentioned is part of it. The commitment to partnership that I mentioned is part of it. There's a very strong emphasis here on giving. I mean, this city has been blessed with Lilly Endowment. We wouldn't have done a lot. When I was active in the mayor's world, I'd get invited around to give speeches. People would ask me in other cities, could you have done what you did without Lilly Endowment? I say, no, we're very grateful. I mean, tremendously grateful. With Dick Christine and then Gene Beasley and then Tom Lake and now new leadership, Clay and so forth. And it was very important to me that, for just to take one example, when we built Dome Stadium, the Credit Charitable Trust came up with $5 million, Lilly Endowment came up with $25 million. The city came up with $47.5 million in a revenue bond. We sold some suites. It was an $8 million project, which blows your mind now, but that's what it was. And we built that Dome Stadium, and we couldn't have done it without the help of the endowment and the Credit Charitable Trust. It's just that simple. I think also, in addition to the generosity and the partnership and the civic pride, there's this whole feeling of communicating a believable hope. I felt that a mayor played many different roles, but one of the roles that the mayor played, for which I was criticized and campaigned against, was the mayor as a cheerleader. The mayor, maybe like the man in the pulpit or the woman in the pulpit, has to stand up and give people something positive to focus on. And I think that we had a lot of that. You can almost feel the hope and the lifting of the spirit when the Colts came to town, for example, just to take one example. So let me just read this. I've got this little quotation here. It's the last paragraph of Ed Leary's book.
I'm just your straight guy, so go right
Yeah.
ahead.
When I was a minister, when I was in politics and when I was mayor, I used to pull this out of my wallet from time to time and read it. The lubricant that makes this, he wrote this on the 100th anniversary of the city, I think. It would have been, no, that's too early. 150, 1971. About Indianapolis. The lubricant that makes the machinery of the city move forward is civic pride. A pride that extends from the paneled executive suites to modest living rooms deep in the ghetto. Indianapolis, the city that had to pull itself up by its bootstraps 150 years ago, has a unique roll up your sleeves and get with it spirit. It's a city where business and industrial leaders believe they have a responsibility to their community as well as to their stockholders. It's a city that probably boasts more dedicated, professional, and volunteer workers than any city in America. You certainly see that with preparation for the Super Bowl. We saw it in preparation for the Pan Am Games back in 1987. It is this public spiritedness, this civic pride, which is destined to carry Indianapolis to new greatness in the decades and the centuries ahead.
Yeah, but how, you talk about hope, you talk about giving someone the spirit, but you had to deal with evil, you had to deal with crime, you had to deal with despair, you had to deal with tragedy. How do you minister to that when someone is convicted of crimes, shoots someone, drug abuse, the downside, the underbelly?
Every city has a soft underbelly, crime and violence and drug addiction and all the rest of it. And that's why you have to put in place a police department that's willing to take those issues on. That's why you have to try for justice and be willing to call in outside help when you need it, like that Michael Taylor incident began when I was mayor and ended up when Bart Peterson was the mayor, where some people thought that he'd been assassinated by the police and other people, you know, his hands were handcuffed and back and he shot himself in the police car. And it was a terrible, terrible going on. But you just try to work your way through it, John. You try to do the best you can. You try to be fair to everybody. We called in the Justice Department. We called in people from outside to look at this thing and try to help us understand what really happened, what appropriate action would be, and so forth. And then in terms of your field, which basically is urban planning, you know, you want to plan the city in such a way that you communicate that believable hope. For example, wake up one morning and see in the headline in the Indianapolis Star that Indianapolis is the worst infant mortality rate of any city in the country. Worse than the Bronx. Worse than some third-tier countries. Well, infant mortality was not exactly on the front of my radar screen, but